Life is filled with the greatest mysteries known to man. Why did Lauryn Hill never make a second solo album? Why is human life not possible on any planet other than Earth? Why can't the Toronto Maple Leafs make it past the first round of the playoffs? Why did Kevin Harvick blow a 42-point lead over the cut line at Martinsville? Why is Richard such a handsome man? Why does Molly McGee continue to curse Denny Hamlin? Why did the slideshow commentary community destroy itself? Why did Justin Timberlake rip off Janet Jackson's top during the Super Bowl 38 halftime show? The amount of mysteries we as a society think about on a daily basis is truly staggering, but there is one mystery that I've been thinking about for the last 2 months. Why did they make an adult reimagining of Scooby-Doo, and why is it so bad? On this episode of Screenverse, I'm going to solve the mystery of why the adult animated series, known as Velma, is an animated atrocity, and what ultimately went wrong along the way. This incarnation of Velma Dinkley is one of the most unlikable and insufferable main characters I've seen in quite some time. I'm not kidding when I say that her toxic presence makes the show incredibly unpleasant to watch. There are so many reasons why Velma is an unlikable character, and it all starts with her hatred of Daphne. Velma and Daphne used to be friends until Daphne got hot and popular and started hanging out with a new group of friends. Velma believes that Daphne purposely ditched her when in actuality she shut Daphne out after her mom went missing. She intentionally put up walls around herself to keep Daphne and everyone else out, but at the same time she was mad at Daphne over something she willingly chose to do. If you haven't figured it out by now, nothing in this show makes any goddamn sense. She steals Daphne's journal and reads it in front of the entire school solely because Daphne didn't immediately reciprocate her romantic feelings for her, and she reveals that Daphne is so messed up due to abandonment issues that were caused by her biological parents abandoning her as a baby that she talks to the school guidance counselor Lamont about her problems. If the writers were purposely trying to make Velma an irredeemable asshole, then they succeeded. What makes her characterization even worse is the fact that she falsely accuses Fred of murdering Brenda and Krista simply because he's a rich white guy that has a small dick, which we later find out isn't true because he is completely incapable of cutting up his own food due to the fact that he is dumb. Velma proves Fred's innocence by publicly humiliating him in front of the entire courthouse by revealing the two things I just mentioned. You would think that she would learn from the first time she falsely accused someone of murder, but she would do it again later in season 1 by falsely accusing Norville's father, Lamont, of being the serial killer that murdered Brenda, Krista, and Lola, because he just so happened to have the same welder's mask as the serial killer. Lamont had a welder's mask because he was making Norville a sword for his birthday, which Velma totally forgot about, and we are somehow supposed to believe that she's a good detective. We also can't forget the fact that she laughed at Norville for confessing his love for her while she was having a hallucination. She assumed that he was a stand-up comedian that just told the funniest joke in the history of comedy, even though his tone of voice in no way indicated that he was trying to be funny. We all know that Norville's love for Velma is completely one-sided, but the way she friend-zoned him in the scene when he tries to help her overcome her hallucinations is unnecessarily cruel. When Norville gets a girlfriend named Gigi, Velma tells him that when he's with her, he can talk about boring stuff like swords and feelings, and that when he's with her, they can focus on finding her mom. Despite essentially proclaiming that she doesn't care about their newly formed union, she tries to break them up because she doesn't like the fact that he starts spending all of his time with her and isn't devoting that time to help Velma find her mother. She also solidifies her jealousy and insecurity by getting mad at Norville for choosing a hot girl that puts out over her, despite the fact that she constantly treats him like garbage. Did I mention that Velma berates Daphne for texting other girls? Because nothing says I love you quite like the phrase, "What if I told you about texting in my times of need?" There are so many more examples I could point out that prove how unlikable of a character Velma truly is, but if I did that, we would be here all day. While I personally believe that this incarnation of Velma is an absolute insult to such an iconic character, she is far from the only problem this show has. Velma and Daphne start out hating each other, and it's incredibly petty. Velma blames Daphne for getting hot and ditching her for a new group of friends when she was the one that shut her out when her mom went missing. What was Daphne supposed to do? Be a loner and not have any friends? It's funny to me that Daphne is treated as the bad guy in this situation when her friendship with Velma was never good to begin with. Velma had been possessive over Daphne since the day they met. She went out of her way to isolate her from everyone and would not allow her to be friends with anyone that wasn't her. These are totally the hallmarks of a healthy and respectful relationship. Daphne accuses Velma of trying to make a move on Fred because he stood up for her in the hallway, but he didn't do it because he suddenly had the hots for her. He did it because he wanted to make himself look good as the popular kid. This relationship is already off to a fantastic start. Daphne charges Velma $500 in order to obtain her mom's case file. So they sell drugs to kids at their high school because Daphne is a drug dealer for some reason. At some point during this drug dealing excursion, the show snaps its fingers like Thanos and decides that they don't hate each other anymore, which is a testament to how little thought they put into this relationship. I'm not kidding when I say that this relationship is rushed and underdeveloped, and nowhere is that more evident than the end of the second episode where Velma and Daphne share a kiss. You heard that correctly, they went from hating each other's guts to smacking lips in the span of 2 episodes. This is totally a well thought out relationship that isn't forced or contrived in any conceivable way. It's also important to mention that they kiss despite the fact that they both know that Daphne is in a relationship with Fred. The fact that nobody has pointed that out is surprising to me. Velma realizes that she likes Daphne as more than a friend, but Daphne is scared to reciprocate her feelings because she has a lot more at stake. Velma misinterprets Daphne's reluctance to take the next step in their relationship as her saying that she doesn't want to be with her because she's popular and Velma isn't, which is something Daphne never said. Velma decides to retaliate by revealing to the entire school that Daphne is so messed up that she has to talk to Lamont about her abandonment issues that she has developed as a result of trying to find her biological parents. What the fuck? Another example of Velma and Daphne's toxic relationship is when Velma fakes having a hallucination in order to manipulate Daphne into going to the woods with her to help find her mother. She did this because she couldn't stand the fact that Daphne has friends other than her. Daphne rightfully chews her out for this, but just when you think that Velma will actually face meaningful consequences for her actions, Daphne turns around and admits that she likes Velma's possessiveness and that it's one of her favorite parts about their friendship. She also reveals that she only hung out with Olive as a way to make Velma jealous because she likes to feel wanted due to her abandonment issues.
You serious?
Daphne has been friends with Olive since the beginning of the series. I'm pretty sure that she was hanging out with Olive because she legitimately wanted to, but for some reason the show tries to gaslight you into believing that Daphne purposely hung out with Olive to make Velma jealous as a way of trying to justify this extremely toxic relationship. I can understand needing to feel wanted because of abandonment issues, but just because that's the case doesn't mean that you should settle for a toxic and unhealthy relationship. They are not cute, they are not fun, they are not #relationship goals, they are a horrible couple that should not be together. So the fact that the show is insistent on shoving this horrible relationship down our throats is incredibly irritating. Velma and Daphne eventually come to the realization that their friendship was toxic, so instead of going their separate ways, they decide to try being girlfriends, because normalizing toxic relationships is totally cool. Velma and Daphne share a kiss in the season finale, and instead of saying "I love you, Daphne," she says "I love you, Norville," which makes no sense because she brutally friend-zoned him in the pilot. Norville and Fred also express romantic interest in Velma at various points in season 1, so I'll talk about it briefly. The show goes out of its way to showcase that Norville is a simp and that Velma will never like him in a romantic sense. She ignores his voicemail, she openly called his feelings boring, and she laughed at him when he confessed his love for her. If that isn't a clear indication that Velma doesn't care about Norville as a romantic partner, then quite frankly, I don't know what does. Unfortunately, the show completely contradicts itself by having Velma accidentally say that she loves Norville after she listens to all of the voicemails he sent her over the years. This accidental revelation was enough to get Norville to help Velma in her time of need, despite the fact that he cut ties with her in the previous episode for falsely accusing his dad of being a murderer. As for Fred, he starts off as a chauvinistic asshole who only appreciates women for their physical beauty, until Velma gives him a copy of the book The Feminine Mystique, which all of a sudden makes him appreciate women for their inner beauty. The woman he chose to appreciate for her inner beauty was Velma. He decides to ask her out, but he gets rejected. By the way, he pursues Velma, even though he is technically supposed to be in a relationship with Daphne. There are a couple more instances where he expresses romantic interest in Velma, but it ultimately goes nowhere, which makes this subplot completely pointless. Honestly, this whole love triangle feels less like an adult animated series and more like a self-insert fanfiction that someone wrote in their bedroom. Norville is a pathetic simp that is constantly trying to win Velma's affection, despite the fact that she doesn't care about him, both as a romantic partner and as a friend. The only reason Velma and Norville are friends is because she was jealous of the fact that Daphne started hanging out with a new group of friends, and since she didn't have anyone to boss around, she unfortunately chose Norville to be her de facto slave. What makes this even worse is the fact that Norville lets Velma walk all over him and treat him like garbage, even though he goes above and beyond to try and help her. He tries to sell his sword to a shady group of criminals so he can get the $500 that Velma needs in order to obtain her mom's case file. He also does this as a way of blackmailing her into dating him. He professes his love for Velma on more than one occasion to make her hallucinations go away because it makes her laugh. He pretended to be the fake father of Velma's fake baby Amanda because she didn't want to tell her mom that her dad moved on and had a kid with another woman. He made the marching band clean up Velma's house after it got trashed due to the fact that they didn't have any food. He hacked into his mom's computer to change her grades so that her mom would still think she was smart, and he published an article in the school newspaper to make Velma look like a heroic teen mom. All of this is extremely one-sided because Velma would never do the same for him, and she makes it abundantly clear that she only keeps Norville around when she needs him to do something for her. This one-sided crush doesn't work because not only do we not know why Norville likes Velma as a friend, we don't know why he likes her as a romantic partner. She doesn't have any positive traits that would make her ideal as a girlfriend. Despite this, Norville is head over heels in love with her because he's a pathetic simp that the audience is supposed to laugh at. Even when he moves on from Velma and starts dating Gigi, his unrequited love for Velma never goes away. This causes a huge strain in their relationship that eventually leads to their breakup. To be clear, the show never explicitly says that they broke up, but it's pretty obvious that they broke up because after episode 8, Gigi is relegated to being a background character. Remember when I mentioned earlier that Velma falsely accused Norville's dad Lamont of being the serial killer because he had a welder's mask in his office? Well, it turns out that Velma went through with this accusation without telling Norville, which caused the police to destroy his house in the process. Norville was understandably furious about this and decided to completely cut ties with Velma. But just when you think that Norville is finally getting some much-needed character development and is cutting a toxic friend out of his life, the show pulls the rug out from under you and completely completely undoes his character development in the season finale. As I mentioned earlier, Velma listened to all of the voicemails Norville sent her over the years, which made her realize that he genuinely cared about her, which is why she sent him a voicemail where she accidentally said that she loved him, which was enough to get him to come crawling back to her, despite the fact that she betrayed him in the previous episode, and what makes it even worse is the fact that he said, "I love you" back.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
If you thought the way the show treated Norville was bad, the way the show treats Fred is even worse. Fred is the Meg Griffin of this show. He was specifically designed to be so pathetic that the audience would grow to hate him. The amount of shit that he goes through in season 1 is quite staggering. As I've mentioned before, Fred was falsely accused of murdering Brenda and Krista simply because he's a rich white guy with a small dick. Velma had no evidence that proved Fred was guilty other than her own bias and prejudice. He gets turned into a literal child in order to give him an aura of innocence, and then it randomly starts to rain, which causes one of his eyelashes to fall below his mouth, which gives him a mustache similar to that of Hitler, and he does the Nazi salute to boot, which makes everyone think he's guilty. Fred is proven innocent when Velma reveals that he can't even cut up his own food due to his lack of intelligence. Everyone in the courthouse laughs at him because of this, which causes Fred to freak out and jump on a table while holding a knife in a threatening manner. His reward for this outburst is being found guilty for murder, even though his innocence had already been proven. When I said that nothing in this show makes any goddamn sense, I truly meant it. Fred and Daphne are technically in a relationship, but that fizzles out after the pilot because Daphne pursues Velma romantically. Fred tries to do the same after he learns how to appreciate a woman's inner beauty after reading The Feminine Mystique, only to be soundly rejected because Velma thought he was gross, which makes absolutely no sense because Velma had a crush on him solely because he was hot. His mom despises him because she feels he's not competent enough to take over Jones Gentleman's accessories, and his dad despises him because he's not the man he wants him to be. They straight up tell him that if he isn't named Fogkin at Fogfest, that he can't come back home. He gets kidnapped by the serial killer and gets trapped in a cave where he has sex with the conscious talking brains of Brenda, Krista, and Lola. Him and Daphne break up. He gets used as the pawn behind the serial killer's motivations, which I will talk about later, and to put a cherry on top of this humiliation sundae, he watches his mom get brutally murdered when a rock falls on top of her head and turns her face into a glorified Slurpee. Despite everything that Fred goes through in this season, the show has the audacity to paint him as a spoiled and privileged rich kid that has had everything handed to him and has never had to work for anything in his life, and they have Velma tell him this straight to his face, which understandably makes him upset. But instead of berating Velma, he thanks her for being honest because that's what friends do, and he's glad to call her a friend. Because toxic friendships are something everyone should accept and embrace, even if it's to the detriment of your sanity and mental health. For a show that tries so hard to be progressive, it was disappointing to see how sexist and misogynistic it was. During Brenda's funeral in the pilot, somebody makes a comment about society believing that when a slutty girl dies, that maybe she deserved it, and then they say that Brenda was the rare slut that didn't deserve it. So if Brenda was the rare slut that didn't deserve to die, then what makes her different from all the other sluts that did deserve to die? If what I just said isn't a clear-cut example of slut-shaming, then I don't know what is. The show is basically saying that if you're a girl girl and you like to be Nelly Furtado, then you deserve to die, because as we all know, the way a girl looks should totally be the deciding factor that determines whether or not they deserve to die. The show goes out of its way to criticize sexism and body shaming by saying that guys tell girls that there's a right way to be hot and that they teach them to be ashamed of their own bodies, and then it turns around and shames hot girls for being hot. They do this by creating a list of the top 5 hottest girls at Crystal Cove High School, and Velma is tasked with making sure that these 5 hot girls are less hot so they don't get murdered. I understand it's an animated series and it's not supposed to be realistic, but murder is not predicated based on how someone looks, and you shouldn't have to change the way that you look so you don't get murdered. The show once again contradicts itself by having Olive berate Velma for slut-shaming her and the other hot girls, and that her idea of womanhood is even more restrictive than theirs are, and then they have Gigi change the way that she looks. This wouldn't have been a bad thing if she willingly chose to do that on her own, but my issue with this change is the fact that she did it solely because of Velma's slut-shaming. The show's logic in this regard makes about as much sense as playing a Kanye West song at a bar mitzvah. What makes all of this extremely uncomfortable is the fact that the girls that are being slut-shamed are underage high school students. But that's okay, because we have to free them from the shackles of the male gaze. After all, they don't look and dress the way that they do for themselves. They do it because they want to attract the attention of men. The show's sexism and body shaming extends to Fred, who not only gets publicly shamed and humiliated for having a small dick, he also gets made fun of due to the fact that he hasn't hit puberty yet. Fred Jones is 16 years old in this show. Did I mention the fact that the show also attacks pregnant women? When Velma's stepmom Sophie is about to have a baby, Velma says, "Are you about to have a baby, or did society tell you to have a baby?" What makes this comment eyebrow-raising is the fact that Velma's voice actress Mindy Kaling is a mother herself. To be clear, she didn't write any of the episodes in season 1, so it would be disingenuous to say that these are her true and honest views on motherhood, but that's still gonna be a yikes from me, dog, because who the hell says something like that to a pregnant woman that's literally about to give birth? While we're on the pregnancy train, the show legitimately believes that a woman getting pregnant is based on how hot they are. When Daphne shows up at Velma's house, her mom, Dia, literally says, "I always assumed that you would be the one to get pregnant." I'm not a pregnancy expert by any means, but that's not how pregnancy works. If someone is determined to get a woman pregnant, then what they look like isn't going to matter. That baby is going to get made. Because pregnancy is a joint union between two people. It is not based on how attractive a woman is, but for some reason that I will never understand, the writers thought it was completely okay for a grown woman to tell a 15-year-old that she assumed that she was going to get pregnant solely because she was hot. The point I'm trying to make here is that if you go out of your way to call out sexism, and then you turn around and do all of the shit I just mentioned, you are completely contradicting yourself. The show is not as progressive as it seems to think it is. It's strangely regressive, and the fact that the writers didn't realize this is truly a testament to the show's appalling lack of self-awareness. The larger overarching story in Season 1 centers around a mass serial killer murdering teenage girls and removing their brains, and Velma trying to find her missing mother Dia, who mysteriously disappeared after she went to buy Velma a Christmas present. No, wait a minute. She went missing because she couldn't stand Velma. No, wait a minute. She went missing because she got hypnotized by the actual serial killer, Victoria Jones, aka Fred's mom. Yes, you heard that correctly. Victoria is the serial killer. You're probably thinking, Zion, that doesn't make any sense. There was absolutely no indication that Victoria was the serial killer. She was only in a handful of scenes this entire season, and now we are somehow supposed to believe that she's the mastermind behind all of this? I'm well aware that this plot twist is just as stupid as it sounds, so allow me to explain how we got to this point. It all started with a man by the name of General Harry Meeting, who specialized in hypnosis in order to manipulate people that protested against the war effort. Dr. Edna Purdue had successfully created a procedure that allowed a human being's brain to be swapped with another brain. General Meeting took an interest in this experiment and teamed up with Dr. Purdue to create the Special Operations Brain Initiative, or Scooby for short. Even though Dr. Purdue created the brain swapping experiment, General Meeting got all of the credit for it, so she undid her experiment, bricked up her lab, and hid her journals so that her work could not be recreated. General Meeting had Dr. Purdue institutionalized so he could take the journals for himself and proceed with the brain-swapping experiment on his own, but Dr. Perdue refused to give it to him, and without the journals, her work could not be recreated, so Project Scooby was shut down. General Meeting abandoned his daughter, Victoria, which left her poor, so she ended up marrying a wealthy man by the name of William Jones, and inherited a company by the name of Jones Gentlemen's Accessories in the process. She turned JGA from a simple ascot shop into a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. But she was frustrated by Fred's incompetence and felt that the company would be undone by his lack of intelligence, so she bought Dr. Perdue's former manor and sought out her journal so that she could give Fred a better brain. How does Dia play into all of this? Well, it turns out that she got curious about Dr. Perdue's work and decided to investigate her former manor, only to run into Victoria, who hypnotized her with a pocket watch and forced her to rebuild Dr. Perdue's lab. Obviously, Dia wasn't working fast enough for Victoria's liking, so she decided to do the job herself and murdered Brenda, Krista, and Lola, and removed their brains in the hopes that one of them would be smart enough to implant into Fred so that he would be competent enough to eventually take over the company.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
Tom put it in her locker for some reason. Velma figured out that Dr. Edna Perdue created the brain-swapping experiment because Norville's mom, Blythe, just so happened to be her daughter, and the only reason she got information from her was because she didn't want Velma to post an embarrassing photo of her online after they both got arrested. Velma has hallucinations because she was hypnotized by Victoria when she tried to find her mom. Norville unintentionally kills Victoria because he conveniently showed up in the nick of time to save Velma and Daphne. Dia is the pawn in Victoria's scheme purely because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and Velma twerked in front of Victoria's dead body because she was happy about solving the case, despite the fact that all of the clues were pretty much handed to her. The way this mystery ultimately resolves itself is so anticlimactic that it gives me the impression that it was shoehorned in because the creative team realized that Scooby-Doo is a franchise about mysteries. I went into the season finale with the lowest expectations possible, and I still felt disappointed, which is perfectly emblematic of the show as a whole. There is no grand conspiracy behind why this mystery sucks. It simply comes down to bad writing and bad storytelling. A lot of people believe that Mindy Kaling is the sole reason why this show is a complete dumpster fire, and I completely understand that. She is the face and the voice of the show. She is one of the executive producers. The show was built around her, and the marketing sold the show as Mindy Kaling's interpretation of Scooby-Doo. She would have gotten all of the credit if the show was good, and she would have taken all of the blame if the show was bad, which is simply the reality when you are the public face of a television show. While it's easy to blame Mindy for all of the show's shortcomings, I don't think that's entirely fair. Contrary to popular belief, she didn't write any of the episodes in Season 1, she didn't develop this adaptation, and she's not the showrunner. As far as I can tell, she has absolutely no creative involvement in the show whatsoever. So while I understand why people are blaming Mindy, I personally believe that she is not to blame for why the show turned out the way that it did. What about Discovery? After all, they were the ones that cancelled Scoob Holiday Haunt, which was a direct-to-streaming sequel to the 2020 theatrical film Scoob, even though the film was nearly finished, for a tax write-off, and also because they felt that it wasn't good enough to release, but for some reason they felt that this show was good enough to release. Discovery cannot be blamed for the show's existence because it was greenlit on February 10th, 2021. At this time, Warner Brothers was still under the Warner Media AT&T regime. Warner Media and Discovery announced their merger on May 17th, 2021, and it officially closed on April 8th, 2022. So by the time Warner Media and Discovery Inc. became Warner Brothers Discovery, the show was already well into production. So as tempting as it is to blame the company that was responsible for bringing 19 kids and counting into the world, we have to cross them off the list as a potential suspect. The fans that hate watch this show are to blame. They should have known it was going to be bad. The trailer didn't do the show any favors, and it was very clear that it was going to be nothing more than a cynical cash grab. It It was the most watched premiere day for an animated series in HBO Max's history. We are getting a second season because of these people, so clearly hate watching is to blame. Hate watching isn't to blame because fans are naturally curious to see how something they like will turn out. People constantly complain about how pointless and unnecessary Disney live-action remakes are, but they still go out to see them in droves because they want to see the animated characters they grew up with in live action, and there's nothing wrong with that. Just like there was nothing wrong with Scooby-Doo fans wanting to watch Velma to see how it would turn out. So who is ultimately to blame for this masterclass in disaster? Who in their right mind thought that a modern reimagining of Scooby-Doo with an insufferable and unlikable version of Velma Dinkley was a good idea? The primary suspect of this grisly murder is none other than the studio that produced it, Warner Brothers Animation. WBA went out of their way to exclude the franchise's titular character from this show. They told the creative team that they were not allowed to use Scooby-Doo because in their eyes, his inclusion was the difference between a kid's show and an adult show. If you're making a Scooby-Doo show without Scooby-Doo, then it's not a Scooby-Doo show, and if it's not going to be a Scooby-Doo show, then it may as well be its own thing. I wholeheartedly believe that Velma was supposed to be an original animated series that starred Mindy Kaling and centered around her life in high school, but Warner Brothers refused to greenlight that pitch because they didn't think an original IP would sell in an era of brands and franchises. I strongly suspect that the only way the creative team behind this show could get their pitch greenlit was if it was based on an established IP. So they took the Doki Doki Panic approach and reskinned the pitch I just described with Scooby-Doo characters, and the rest, as they say, is history. The failure of this show is solely on Warner Brothers Animation. They greenlit a show that was so far removed from what people expect from Scooby-Doo that they essentially set this show up for failure. And it's truly unfortunate because an adult Scooby-Doo show could have worked if it had a far less cynical and mean-spirited tone. Instead, WBA rolled the dice on this modern interpretation and it blew up in their face, and they have nobody to blame but themselves. So with all that being said, I find Warner Brothers Animation guilty for the murder of Velma Dinkley and the Scooby-Doo franchise. And they would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for us meddling kids.